Hello everybody and welcome to Options Discovery on John Lothian News' The Spread. My name is Alex Teng and I will be your host throughout this series. Just like many of you, I am no expert in the options industry, but with the help of some, we're going to learn about options together. In today's episode, we're going to go over what it means to write or sell an options contract. We will also break down our first option strategy called a covered call. Make sure you guys stay tuned to the end of the episode because we have a great interview with former CME and Cboe CEO Bill Brodsky. Bill is an industry legend with over 50 years of experience. He's currently serving as chairman of Option Solutions and is a board member of Cedar Street Asset Management. All right, so in order to break down what a covered call is, we first need to go over what it means to be a seller, otherwise known as a writer of an options contract. Writing an option is a relatively basic concept. Instead of buying a call or put option and paying a premium, you're actually doing the inverse. You sell a call or put option and receive the premium. The good thing about being the writer of an option is if the option expires out of the money, you still get to keep the premium. As the seller of an option, you are offering your obligation to buy or sell an underlying asset. In return, you receive an upfront premium from the buyer. In the case of the covered call strategy, we're selling a call option for a premium. This option will be sold at a strike price that is out of the money. In other words, the strike price is above the current market price of the underlying asset. This means that if an out-of-the-money option were to expire today, the buyer's payout would be a negative payout equal to the premium cost plus any transaction costs. The difference between selling a call option, often referred to as a naked call option, and our covered call strategy is actually the trader's position in the underlying asset. If a trader holds a position in an underlying asset equal to the lot size of that contract, that call option is now considered a covered call. A good example of this is if you held 100 shares of stock and you wanted to sell a call option on that stock with a lot size of 100 shares. Because you already hold enough shares to fulfill the contract, you're covered in the case that the spot price of the stock goes above the strike price and the buyer of the call option wants to exercise the contract. There are many advantages to using a covered call strategy. The first of which being is that a covered call can reduce your losses in the underlying if the market price goes below your purchase price. And this is because the covered call provides cash flow via the premium. So if the price of the underlying stock for a naked call option goes above the strike price, then you as the seller or writer of that option are actually on the hook for purchasing the shares at whatever the market price is to fulfill the contract. Because the market price of a stock could potentially increase by an uncapped or unlimited amount, as the seller of that contract, you do open yourself up to potentially unlimited losses. On the flip side, if you're using a covered call option, you actually don't need to go back onto the market and purchase shares to fulfill a contract if that contract does expire in the money. And the reason for this is because you're already covered, because you already have a long position in the stock. In this case, you do miss out on the potential gains in the stock if the option does expire in the money, but at least you don't take any losses. Now, a covered call strategy is a very basic strategy that pretty much anyone can do as long as they have a long position in an underlying asset. But in the world of options, there are a lot of different strategies to choose from, and new ones are constantly being developed. Luckily, we have a great interview coming up with the former CEO of Cboe and CME, Bill Brodsky. Please enjoy.
Bill, can you please introduce yourself and kind of your education and career path that had led you to where you are today?
So I grew up in the New York area. My dad worked on Wall Street ultimately for 60 years. And I got very enamored with the stock market at a young age. While I was in high school, I worked on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, which in those days was like the prime job that a high school kid would get during the summer. But during my summers in college, I worked at brokerage firms. So my experience was always Wall Street and it was always stock market related. After I graduated from law school, I went to work with my dad at the firm he was associated with. And interesting, while I was there, a group of guys from Chicago showed up and said, "We want you to buy a seat on a new exchange called the Cboe." And of course, that was a very telling time because no one knew what the Cboe was. But it was interesting enough to our firm that we took a shot and bought a seat for $10,000 on the Cboe before it opened. The firm had to then have a compliance person take the test to qualify the firm to do business with the public. And I took the test, qualified the firm, and became what was called a registered options principal. So I was around on the first day that the Cboe opened at a brokerage firm and was involved when a customer actually called up and placed an order on the Cboe. A year after the Cboe opened, went to the American Stock Exchange and ultimately ended up running the option business at the American Stock Exchange, competing with the Cboe. And then in 1982, which is literally 40 years ago this summer, a search firm or a headhunter from Chicago came and said, would you come and run the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which wasn't options, it wasn't stocks, it was futures, which I had no real experience in, but they needed someone because the exchange was growing so fast to kind of manage the staff and the operation. And then I got a knock on the door from another search firm and said, would you come run the Cboe? And of course, that I knew better at the time than I certainly knew what the CME was when they first came to me. And I ended up being at the Cboe for 20 years, 16 of which was chairman and CEO, and the last 3 or 4 years as chairman only, including taking the exchange public, which of course was a very significant part of its development and evolution.
And then currently you're working on a few other firms. So you're currently at Cedar Street Asset Management as a chairman, and you're at Options Solutions as well as a partner. So can you please go into a little bit of detail what you do there and kind of what those companies are all about?
My son, Jonathan, was at a money management firm in Chicago and had developed an expertise in buying small capitalization international stocks. And he was thinking of leaving the firm and going out on his own. I was getting ready to leave the Cboe. So I said, if you start your own firm, I'll move in with you. I'll come help you. So I became what's essentially non-executive chairman of Cedar Street Asset Management, which is a boutique firm that specializes in small international stocks, both developed markets and emerging markets that have the value-based as opposed to growth-based. He was recently given 5 stars by Morningstar. He was added to the Schwab recommended list of mutual funds because he's partnered with Harbor International. So he's the advisor to the Harbor International Small Cap Fund. And then 2.5 years ago, through some other involvements, I partnered with my son, Michael, to create a firm called Option Solutions, which is again, boutique firm that specializes in doing options in a very conservative way, primarily covered writing for high net worth investors.
Now, I know you were not necessarily a trader, but you worked more on the exchange side. So I was kind of wondering, over the course of your career, how have you seen new products developed on the exchange side affect market players and how they've kind of changed their strategies over time? How were things different from when you started back in the 80s to now?
The key to it is that it was based on product development and liquidity and then education. And the Chicago exchanges, the CME, the Board of Trade, the Cboe, did an amazing job in creating products, whether it was the initial concept of standardization of financial futures, tradable options, was all done in Chicago based on the experience at the 2 big futures exchanges on how they standardized the products and how they created clearing and then creating liquidity. And all of these were necessary. You could have a great idea. If you didn't have liquidity, it didn't work. You got a great idea, you could have liquidity, you didn't have education, it didn't work. And all these came together in a very beautiful way. And one of the things that I was always excited about is that all the things we were doing in Chicago were then copied by literally dozens of exchanges all over the world. There was no financial futures of any consequence outside the U.S. when the CME and the CBOT created financial futures. There were no option exchanges outside the U.S. until Cboe started. And now these products trade all over the world.
And to kind of pivot things back to this week's theme, I wanted to talk about option strategy and pertains to a larger portfolio and how that can be used to manage assets on a larger portfolio. And I was curious to see some of the overall policies that you have at your new firm, Options Solutions, that kind of are implemented to kind of follow that concept, and how you manage your clients' larger portfolio using conservative options and covered writing strategies?
The firm Option Solutions, which we started just a couple of years ago, was really based on my own personal situation of knowing options and having taken the Cboe public. I had a large position in Cboe stock, and I said, I don't want to sell the stock, but I know what a covered call is. And if I could sell covered calls on my stock on a regular basis, that'd probably be a pretty good thing to do. In the course of doing that, I dealt with some major institutions in Chicago, and they said, we don't do that, but if you started a firm that would do that for you and for other customers, we'd send you business. So we realized that we were onto something, that we were providing a service to people who own stock, usually had a low basis in the stock, didn't want to sell the stock, and in many cases were living on the dividends, and we were now creating another source of income. But the important thing about that is, as the stock moved around, we had to be very nimble to make sure the stock didn't get called away. So we were always very concerned about when the earnings were coming out, when stock was going ex-dividend, or any news on the stock. And we've developed a very nice stable of clients who are similarly situated. And the hardest thing is to get them to understand, one, that options are not just speculative. They're scared of it in the first place. And then they don't understand what a covered call is. So we have to explain that basically you're offering to sell your stock at a higher price, but because of the liquidity that we created in the option markets, if we have to buy it back, whether it's at a profit or a loss, we can do that. So it's something that takes a tremendous amount of oversight or watching every single day, but our results have been very good in different market cycles. You're not always going to be making a lot of money if the market's going straight up. If the market goes down, you're going to be making money the client wouldn't have made. And if the market kind of stays the same or meanders, that's the best of all worlds. So we don't worry about the stock itself. The client says, I want my stock. Don't mess with my position. Just get me some extra income. And that's fundamentally what we've been doing. We do some other things, but the core business is selling covered calls for clients who have large, what's known as concentrated stock positions.
One thing that we're always curious about is, what are some of the most important lessons that you've learned throughout your entire career working in the options industry, and things that you would pass down to someone that's looking to start a career in the options industry?
That options are, as I used the term earlier, multidimensional. You can do almost anything with options without the underlying stock, or options with the underlying stock. You just got to learn the fundamentals. You got to understand the concepts. And the key to options is understanding what I call the erosion of time value, and how that works in the client's favor. So there's just, options are so much more complicated and intricate compared to stocks or futures.
Is there a topic that you think we should go over in a future episode?
Three things that come to mind: options on individual stocks, how people can use them; options on indexes through options on ETFs, another way to use them, because there are options on ETFs that are cash settled. There are options on ETFs that are physical settled. So different aspects of that. And then, of course, the thing that I'm most proud of in terms of my Cboe experience is the creation of the volatility index, and then options and futures on VIX, which is a whole different situation. So each one of these is a course unto itself. But I'm very proud that there's an enormous amount of material, very often created by the Cboe, that's available to people for just, it's out there. It's easy to get.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you today, Bill. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I know the viewers appreciate all the information.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye. If you're hungry for more options content, make sure to subscribe to the JLN YouTube channel and check out our social media accounts. Be sure to check out our website, johnlothiannews.com, Markets Wiki, and the John Lothian newsletter for more content.